As someone who's played Genshin for several years, I have been hoping for a game like Wuthering Waves for a long time. One of the main reasons I played Genshin was because I liked the combat system, but it never reached a high difficulty level. Wuthering Waves seemed like it was a game that would have that higher difficulty I wanted, and so I tried it out for the last 2 months. So, what is Wuthering Waves? It's a gacha open world RPG that focuses primarily on combat, and it is set in a post-apocalyptic world. You, the protagonist called Rover, have lost their past memories and go on a journey in this world of Solaris 3 to figure out who they are and what their role is in this world. I split my experience over the last 2 months into multiple sections as shown on screen. You can skip around to those sections via the timestamps in the description below. Keep in mind that there will be potential spoilers for those of you that haven't finished 1.1 story yet. So let's talk about my 2-month experience. Starting with the combat. At its core, the combat is focused on 3 things: dodging, parrying, and combos. When you dodge successfully, a time slowdown is initiated. Parrying also has this effect as well, and the duration of the slowdown widely varies across enemies. It does feel pretty good to dodge and parry, especially in difficult scenarios. Character combinations are also pretty satisfying to pull off given the animation quality, and also the smoothness of their animations. I mean, this is the current character that's on the banner, Chong-Li, and you cannot tell me that this sequence is not insane. I mean, come on. It's pretty good. Player movement also has quite a few options as well, especially with a grapple. There are a lot of hidden mechanics to explore, including counterattack iframes, super jumping, aerial combos, etc. In terms of how you can interact with the game as a player, the system in place is pretty solid when everything works. The enemies themselves also have really cool animations. Scar is probably the boss that stood out to me the most. His human phase is pretty quick and agile, makes attacks, he can even parry your skills. His second phase stands out in stark contrast as the moves become slower as a result of the larger boss size. In exchange, these attacks hit much harder, and these attack patterns are fairly similar to those from Elden Ring bosses. Most fights in the story and overworld aren't that difficult, even with massive level gaps. For the most part, you can fight with your brain turned off and suffer little to no issues, with the exception being boss fights. Boss fights definitely require you to pay attention to the overall attack patterns, and for certain challenges, being reactive isn't enough. You'll have to know the attack pattern going into the fight in order to properly dodge/parry enough so that you don't die. Wuthering Waves has 2 specific endgame modes, being Tower of Adversity and hologram bosses. So first, let's talk about Tower of Adversity. This mode was a pretty big turnoff for me, mainly due to the intervention of artificial difficulty. Bosses in this game can be difficult enough, and can even be enhanced to be more difficult based upon what they've done with the hologram bosses, which I'll get to in a little bit. So it doesn't make much sense to me why they decided to put a DPS check on top of that. Most likely it's to just encourage people to learn more efficient combos/rotations, since that is an aspect of the game that is highly focused on, but it still feels pretty bad with the way it's currently implemented. The mode also prevents you from using a single team in all 3 sections of the mode, which makes the mode overall less of a combat challenge and more of a DPS check/character check. I am probably more frustrated by this than the average player, considering I've been doing Spiral Abyss and Genshin for almost 4 years, and the Tower of Adversity is pretty reminiscent of that, so that's probably why I'm so negative towards it. I was hoping for, you know, a more different combat experience, but that's probably more of my taste issue and not necessarily reflective of the wider player base. Because of that, I spent way more time fighting the hologram bosses. These are enhanced versions of their overworld counterparts. Groundless has a full-on punching phase. Methus spawns a clone of himself. Ike's fires 3 groups of missiles if you miss a parry, etc. As of recording this review, I have beaten all of these bosses at their highest difficulty with at least a 20 to 30 level gap between my characters and the boss's level. These fights were pretty difficult, partially due to challenging myself with a significant level gap, but also because these bosses can just straight up one-shot you, regardless of your level. I think there is some contention regarding one-shots, because it seems like even fairly quick attacks can one-shot you. As a result, hologram bosses generally encourage more proactive gameplay versus reactive. These bosses also have quite a few bugs. Because of how fast the attacks are, sometimes the game will register you dodging via the sound cue, but you'll still get hit. In some cases, your character will be in the dodge animation, but still somehow get hit. Parrying is also subject to similar issues. As you can see, there are desync timers occasionally, and based on timing, you think you should parry, or should parry the boss, but it doesn't end up happening. And then other times, you'll parry, but somehow take the damage and or die despite it being a perfect parry, when the boss is actually stunned and knocked down. So it doesn't make sense quite a bit of the time. I don't believe that this is necessarily a ping issue, but more of a client-server desync issue. My ping was fairly stable during these gameplay sessions. I'll talk about this more detail in the game stability section, but it generally makes fighting these enemies less fun, as you can't straight up trust the game because it gives you mixed signals. Building characters is done via the ecosystem for combat, and the devs spent a lot of effort in this area. There's over 100 different skills corresponding to each of the echoes. They also act as your artifacts or stat boosts, giving your characters more damage. You're way more likely to get a good echo in this game in comparison to many other games that have an artifact system. Like, the chance you get one crit stat within your first 3 substat lines is about 42%, and you don't have to hope that you roll into the same line like Genshin. Once you get the line, you're done. You're free from leveling hell. The resources for echo leveling are a bit limited, but that's to be expected with a recently released gacha. I don't personally like how the elemental trait bonuses are basically the same thing across most of the sets, which is just like a free 40% damage boost. It just makes the game feel very limited in terms of how you can build your character aside from assigning the echo skill, and in general, these set bonuses feel pretty one-dimensional. Speaking of elements, each character has one, but it doesn't do anything besides affect your damage via enemy resistances / immunities and echo set bonuses, which is fairly boring. It kind of makes me question why they're in the game at all, if there's no way for these elements to interact with one another. They probably planned on putting reactions initially based upon what I saw and scrapped it, which does give me some hope that they'll expand the combat system later to include other effects with these elements, but as for right now, they don't do much. Overall, you can definitely feel the amount of effort that was placed towards the combat system and refining to what it is currently. However, I do have some more critique with the core systems of the game, mainly the time slowdown effect. This effect can often freeze your character's controls, preventing them from moving at all. I'll be talking about this more in the game stability section again, but in general, while the core systems of the game are good in design, they aren't polished very well, likely due to a result of the game's rush launch. Next, let's talk about the exploration. I found exploration to be relatively refreshing, mainly because of all the in-game tools that are given to you relatively early into the game. The loot mapper allows you to see most chests. There's also the casket sonar, which allows you to find the main collectibles across the map, called caskets, and these can be cashed in for further rewards. The best part, again, is that you get all these useful gadgets pretty early on in the game, as in the first few hours or so, and they work everywhere. It's not limited to one region or the other. Though, by far the best part is being able to run on walls. It seems pretty simplistic as a feature, I know, but it greatly reduces the amount of time to properly explore an area. You don't have to be climbing a mountain, stop for 10 seconds, and then climb again, and keep repeating that for the next minute. You can just run up the mountain. Similar things can be said about the grapple. It's great. I do hope that they don't go down the route of locking more areas behind quests like they did with Mount Firmament. It's an open world. We should be able to go where we want to. This is my main contention with open worlds, where they lock stuff behind quests. I don't really like that. Some areas I'm fine with if it's like a small mini area. Kind of makes more sense, but locking an entire region is sort of just not great. I found the open world environment to be cool, but not very memorable. It does a good job reflecting the setting it's supposed to, but doesn't give a lasting impression in general. I will say that Mount Firmament in 1.1 was definitely a step up, and is very recognizable, partially due to how different the area feels in comparison to the rest of the map, both color palette wise and just setting wise. It also helps to have a huge statue of a dragon visible across the entire area. Next, the characters. I've already mentioned it before, but the animations on characters are god tier. a lot of work was placed towards making these animations as good as possible, and in the entire gacha genre, these are probably the best animations you could possibly find. Plus, in the story, you can also see legitimate facial expressions. It enhances the story quite a bit. I did initially have some complaints about the color palette being fairly similar across all characters, but thinking about what characters would actually realistically wear in the post-apocalyptic world, it kind of makes sense that they would use some kind of tech wear, which is traditionally black and white in color due to practicality, so in terms of the setting, it makes sense. Characterization isn't necessarily the best partially because of the story's slow start. Scar was definitely a likable character for me, with how his personality came out in the story, as well as being voice acted. 1.1 is definitely an improvement in this department, with more specific focus on Jinshi and Changli, the banner characters of the patch. Some characters you can get via the gacha currently aren't portrayed in the story, so we'll see how it goes from here, but so far they've made great improvements towards improving characterization and just making the characters feel more alive. I mean, heck, the NPCs even have like character-worthy designs. As for the gacha system itself, the rates are actually pretty fair in comparison to the rest of the genre and is more generous in a lot of cases. 80 is the max pity across all banners. You have a guaranteed limited 5-star weapon on the weapon banner, so you can't lose, say, a 25-75 or any other ratio you can think of. And early on, they also gave out a free standard 5-star. I would also like to point out that the amount of currency you can get per patch so far has been more than enough to guarantee one 5-star, whether that be a weapon or character. So the game, overall, is pretty free-to-play friendly. It also helps that the gameplay promotes skill more than the wallet, though the wallet is still the all-powerful entity as it is with any gacha game. Next, the story. Quite a lot has been said about Wuthering Waves' story, from the word soup in the first few acts to how Scar's introduction to the story gives it much needed intrigue and direction. I found the story overall to be average. It's not terrible, but it's not great. I didn't necessarily have that many complaints about the initial few acts, acts 1 through 3 specifically, mainly because I was trying to pay attention to the setup of things. And also, I've watched shows that have introduced 20 characters within the first hour, so in comparison to that, this is a walk in the park. It is a bit disappointing that they scrapped some of the story beats from the initial draft from CBT1, having a character, specifically Chisha, be more doubtful of the rover. And honestly, that would have been a more interesting dynamic overall, but unfortunately, a lot of people didn't like that, or didn't like a lot of the story in CBT1, so they just ended up scrapping the whole thing. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Scar's introduction as an antagonist definitely brings more to the table, and I like how the dialogue choices actually affect what you experience in the story and actively change the dialogue you hear. It's like your choices matter. Wow, imagine that, right? You can actually fight Scar without doing what he told you to do, which was explore the village, and it's a nice addition. Later in the battle against the Fernodian, you could actually see playable characters fighting with you. These characters that they place next to you would actively use the same skills the player could, like grappling. It really made me more immersed in the overall story as a result. Characters actually having lively expressions, having them actually participate in combat beyond just being AFK there. It's great. I would say that Act 6 was good overall and had a satisfying conclusion, but a large amount of my playtime during that section was significantly ruined by audio bugs.
Why is it so loud? Oh god, what is making that noise? What was that noise?
Act 7 was also decent, though I found myself questioning why the rover had to summarize everything said near the end. I guess they're trying to pander to a specific audience, but I don't know, it just felt kind of weird playing through the entire class and then hearing a 5-minute summary of it, and it's just like, why? Now, this is a personal gripe. I am a bit confused why this game has a skip button when you cannot replay cutscenes or dialogue. It doesn't really make sense to me to have a skip button when you can't experience things again without having to refer to a YouTube video. Don't get me wrong, it's nice to have for player freedom. It's just a bit odd to have when you can't revisit dialogue again. Next, the music. Okay, music is a pretty subjective topic, and many have their differing opinions on it. I found the soundtrack to be rather lackluster, mainly because the majority of the tracks sound kind of generic to me.
Swift and resolute.
There wasn't really a motif or theme I could really grab across on present soundtrack. There were definitely some good tracks though, like Crownless's theme. Though I was disappointed when the full theme isn't present for the hologram boss. Like, missed opportunity, hello. Where's my guitar riff, man? It also didn't help that across my playtime, I ran across quite a few audio issues that made the music not play at all, or worse, play too much. Now, before you say that it's okay for Wuthering Waves to have a mediocre soundtrack, I would like to disagree. From the outset, sound is heavily ingrained in the world's design and lore. You can see waves and equalizers practically everywhere, from the UI design to the forte bars to even the terminology, where resonance is used far too much. It's a critical part of the identity that Wuthering Waves has built itself around. If any game was supposed to have a banger soundtrack, this would be one of the games. And unfortunately, as it is right now, I don't think the game has that. It's also a shame that the game doesn't seem to have dynamic music changes when bosses change forms or phases for the most part. I think having that would make the combat stand out even more, and again, makes it more dynamic. Music is intentionally supposed to enhance the gameplay, and in my opinion, can be as important as the gameplay itself. Game stability. Oh boy. I think saying the current state is bad is a bit of an understatement. To be completely transparent here, my footage was recorded across two different setups, one with a Ryzen 2700X and a GeForce 1050 Ti, and my current setup with a Ryzen 7800X 3D and a GeForce 4700. I recorded any footage post 1.1 update with the beefier setup, and any footage before that was with my older setup. You might have seen the bug video I made on Wuwa a while back, and I encountered many issues with the game during 1.0. Like a lot. Here's a 30-second summary. Please don't watch this if you have any sensitivity to bright flashing lights or loud noises.
I'm so frustrated.
Precision, elegance, and harmony. These are the beautiful parallels.
And shell credit? Please, enemies, kill me now. Free me from this eternal prison. Oh, and I broke it again.
How has this happened again? Honestly, I should just treat it as a debuff. This is just the effect of this arena. You have a 25% chance of triggering an infinite parry that completely ruins your gaming experience. Like, dude, you're kidding me.
Now, again, to be completely fair, my older setup was slightly under their minimum specs, but at no point was my graphics card actually maxed during my play sessions. Additionally, the bugs you just saw weren't limited to a specific device and could be reproduced on multiple devices. Frame and ping drops were also fairly common during 1.0. Now, with my new setup and the intervention of 1.1 update, I haven't gone many frame drops, though ping drops are still present, and anytime I log in the next day, my ping to the server somehow changes for whatever reason, like significantly changes. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm just sitting here like, how is this happening? But it is what it is. I also have this weird noise issue when I dodge. Sometimes I hear a popping sound. I'm not sure what the situation looks like on mobile, as I haven't tried playing this game on my device, though it probably wouldn't run well considering I have frame drops playing Honkai Star Rail on it. From the numerous Reddit posts I have seen about this game's performance on mobile, it seems dodgy at best, especially considering how people treat patch updates to the game as a gacha. Sometimes the update improves your performance, other times it makes it worse. I'd also recommend not running Wuwa on a hard drive. It really increases the load times exponentially, with it taking sometimes more than 5 minutes to load into the game at a time, and teleporting to a new area also gives you a very long loading window. Now, I will say that the team actually has placed a lot of effort into trying to fix the numerous issues with the game during launch, and even now, they released many micro patches to try and fix the game. And yes, they may not have worked for everyone, but at least they put in the effort to try and get everything working. And so I feel much more comfortable with a developer that's like this versus another one that might just leave the game for a whole week when they have significant issues. The core combat also seems to not work perfectly a lot of the time. With bosses being fairly quick, it's actually pretty critical for the game to properly communicate when to parry/dodge. As it is currently, there are a lot of audio and visual clarity issues. Like, what am I dodging here? The air? Next, I'm clearly in the dodge animation, but I died. Why? Did I dodge the air somehow and that led me to dying on his actual attack? Why are my character controls frozen after successfully parrying?
お前はもう死んでいる。何?
Oh, I was locked in the slowdown animation. Okay. Better, why is my camera jerking around like my little brother is trying to take my controller? Now, again, a lot of these issues may seem small and inconsequential, but it's really infuriating for them to be there. And it negatively affects the combat experience because you'll have to be paying attention to both these potential issues that come up that limit your gameplay options without meaning to, by the way, while also making sure that you don't die. If you don't have the patience of a god, I definitely wouldn't recommend tackling the challenging content until after a lot of these issues are fixed. Now, you might counter me by saying, you only showed hologram boss fights. Does this happen elsewhere? And yes, it does. But I would say it matters way more for these fights due to how critical it is to have visual and audio clarity in situations where you can be one-shot. Overall, it's a game with a lot of potential. Ideally, should have been kept in development for a bit longer. I know there are reasons why they couldn't do so. If we're talking about creating a game that felt finished, this really should have been put in development for a bit longer. Patches 1.0 and 1.1 in general felt more like a third beta test experience rather than a full-fledged game release. The core combat design-wise is solid, but it's brought down by a lot of various bugs and issues with it, both intentional design and unintentional issues. Exploration is fun and quick, especially with all the quality of life features the game provides. The characters are well animated and expressive, plus the gacha itself is more free-to-play friendly than most other gachas I've played. The story is average, with some highlights and initial word soup. Music to me is a bit of a letdown, and doesn't enhance gameplay as much as it should. And the game stability is about as stable as me winning my 50-50s, which is not really much. I've heard from some beta testers in 1.2 that allegedly menu stability / optimization issues will be fixed, but only time will tell. That said, I have enjoyed my experience in this game overall, and you can expect some Wuthering Waves related content down the line. I hope that this review of mine, or my experience in general, was helpful to you in figuring out whether or not you should play this game. Please let me know if there are things that I missed, or things I could have done better, as this is my first game review. So, thank you for watching, and hope to see you in another video.